Putin Bad News. Who are these people and where are they going from Russia? In September of last year, after President Vladimir Putin ordered a military mobilization, thousands of Russians flocked to the border. Since the beginning of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, it is estimated that hundreds of thousands of Russians have fled the country. Who they are, where they're going, and why they're leaving are all things we investigate. Svetlana is a 30-something country girl at heart. In order to attend university, she uprooted to Moscow at age 18. She went on to pursue a career in product management after college. She said, "I love Russia and I enjoyed my life. I never thought I'd have to leave." Even before the war in Ukraine broke out, Russians who disagreed with Moscow's 2014 annexation of Crimea and with new laws that made it easier to punish dissent were leaving the country in large numbers. Some went to Georgia, while others went to the EU countries. The full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022 was a watershed moment for Svetlana. "When the war broke out, I knew it wouldn't be over anytime soon, and I also knew that people wouldn't be protesting." She explains, "I knew in my heart and my head that I needed to get out of there." She has arrived in Belgrade, the capital of Serbia. "I wanted to get as far away from the authorities as possible." The trickle of Russians who shared her views quickly became a torrent. New emigrants told the BBC they were against the war and disappointed that more Russians did not come out to protest when the first wave arrived in March and April of last year. They felt threatened by being on their own, so they decided to leave. In September of 2022, President Putin ordered a military mobilization to begin. Though it was deemed partial by the powers that be, in reality it meant that the majority of men were at risk of being drafted. There were subsequent reports of inadequate training and equipment for the newly enlisted. There were long lines at the Russian border with Georgia and Kazakhstan as men and their families fled the country. Dmitry Peskov, the official spokesman for the Russian president, has denied that many Russians are leaving the country to avoid conscription. Russian authorities implemented an online call-up in April, whereby new conscripts could be added to a digital register instead of being handed the papers by hand. He also denied that the new system was intended to stem the outflow of male citizens. There are no official estimates of the number of Russians who have emigrated, but these estimates range from the hundreds of thousands to the several million. In May, the UK Ministry of Defence predicted that by 2022, 3 million people would have left Russia. The trend is also supported by other statistical estimations from other sources. Forbes magazine reported that in 2022, between 600,000 and 1 million people left Russia, citing official estimates. Independent Russian media outlets The Bell and RTVI both reported very similar numbers. Assuming you have the means to do so and have not been conscripted, leaving Russia is a fairly simple process. However, finding a place to call home can be challenging. Many countries, especially those in the European Union and the United States, tightened their visa requirements for Russian citizens in the months following the outbreak of hostilities, making travel impossible for those who weren't visiting family or going on official business. For the most part, Russians were free to travel and live wherever they pleased in countries like Georgia and Armenia. This is still a possibility. Limits on the number of days tourists from Russia can stay in those countries were implemented earlier this year, with the intention of slowing the influx of new Russian residents. More and more Russian citizens living abroad are applying for residency visas so they can legally work in their new countries of residence, even if they have no intention of ever returning to Russia. According to available data, over the course of the last 15 months, a total of 155,000 Russian nationals have been granted temporary residence permits in European Union member states as well as in several Balkan, Caucasus, and Central Asian nations. According to the European Union Agency for Asylum, nearly 17,000 people have applied for political asylum in EU countries, but only about 2,000 have been granted asylum. The number of Russian citizens applying for passports from other countries has increased by 40% in 2022, according to the Russian Ministry of the Interior. We have spoken with dozens of Russians who have fled the country since the conflict began. They're from all different backgrounds. We journalists are joined by those who work in IT, design, art, academia, law, medicine, public relations, and languages. The median age is under 50. There are many in Russia who support liberal Western values and wish for Russia to become a democratic nation. Others identify as non-heterosexual or sexual. Evidence suggests that those leaving Russia are younger, more educated, and more financially secure than those who remain, according to sociologists who have studied the current emigration. They tend to hail from larger urban centers. St. Petersburg is home for Thomas. As a pacifist, the thought of being sent to kill others filled me with dread. Since 2014, I have been critical of Russia's actions in Ukraine. The invasion and subsequent civilian deaths are not acceptable, he declared. He claimed that he became politically active, posting anti-war messages online and participating in street demonstrations, after the start of the full-scale invasion. He worried about his own personal security as a gay man. After Russia adopted laws on ban on gay propaganda, and on fake news about the Russian army, I knew that the threat to my life and freedom had increased, he says. Thomas submitted an asylum request to the Swedish government, detailing the dangers of going back to Russia. His application had been denied, but he filed an appeal. I'm working on my own evidence collection because my time with a state lawyer is limited. Sergei, a native of Rostov-on-Don in the south, has a unique set of challenges to face. He recently landed in Tbilisi, Georgia. On the day Russia invaded Ukraine, he called several friends and they all said they were worried about the conflict. He predicted that the economy would decline regardless of what happened next. We had a group meeting a week later and made the decision to get ready to leave. Sergei claims that as time passed, the war drew closer. A lot of military equipment was passing through on its way to Ukraine. There was a massive influx of wounded patients to area hospitals. There were many planes, but Rostov Airport was closed to civilian flights, and we knew their destination. Sergei's mother called him in September after Putin's mobilization speech and told him to pack your things and go. She had previously criticized him for not being sufficiently patriotic. Sergei spent the night on the road en route to his new home in Georgia. My family still resides in Russia. Both their living costs and mine will be on me while I am over there. I have a job in Russia that I do from home, and I also do some work for a friend's company in this city. Sergei claims he is setting aside money in order to relocate his family outside of Russia. His wife, who had been hesitant at first, has come around to the idea that they need to start over somewhere else, he said. Authorities in Russia tried to downplay the effect of hundreds of thousands of educated and well-off citizens leaving the country and taking their wealth with them, but the effect on the economy is clear. According to Alfa Bank, Russia's largest private bank, 1.5% of the country's total workforce may have fled Russia. Those who have left are mostly highly qualified experts. Organizations lament having trouble filling positions and recruiting new workers. In the early days of the conflict, Russians withdrew a record 1.2 trillion rubles, roughly £12 billion per $15 billion, from their accounts, according to the Central Bank of Russia. The last time anything like this happened in Russia was the financial crisis of 2008. Russian National Academy of Sciences economist Sergei Smirnov predicts a continuing exodus of the country's most educated and skilled workers. Caption for media. The need for people who can make shoes and repair automobiles will only grow. I'm not one for doomsday predictions, but I think this will cause productivity in the Russian economy to decline steadily. The Economist notes that these tendencies will have a disproportionate impact on major urban centers like Moscow, St. Petersburg, and Yekaterinburg. To paraphrase Vladimir Putin, most of the Russian territory will not be aware of these transformations because standards of living in smaller cities, towns, and villages have always been low and will continue to be low in the future. Svetlana, meanwhile in Belgrade, has no intention of going back to Russia. I'm currently employed by a startup in Moldova, but I've been looking for work in the Netherlands. In Tbilisi, Sergey is looking for work in Europe. Life is difficult for him right now. I don't have any days off, sometimes I don't have enough time to get a night's sleep, I nap in the car. And Thomas in Sweden is praying he won't have to return to Russia and face the homophobic abuse he knows he'll get there. For the sake of finding work, he is studying Swedish.